But someone who solved that problem in a more conventional way was the local congressman named Harry Englebright. He was a well-connected young man of old families in Nevada City, went to Nevada City High School, spent some time at the University at Berkeley, graduated from an engineering school in San Francisco, followed his father's footsteps. His father had been a consulting mining engineer in Nevada City and the Northern Mines region. And Harry pursued that line of work also. And as a matter of fact, he was the consulting engineer for my family's mine, and a number of my extended family are here today. And he was our consulting engineer at our mine in Allegheny. And we have some reports, I think courtesy of the White family, that he wrote at the time that he was working in our mine. More importantly, he followed his father into the United States Congress. His father became the congressman from this region, and this second congressional district of California at that time was one of the largest districts in the entire country. It covered 8 counties from Yosemite to the Oregon border. And he represented it all. When the Roosevelt administration came into office in March of 1930, the country demanded action, and President Roosevelt gave them action. And we had that important period of our history known as the 100 days. That is sort of the something presidents, newly elected presidents have been trying to live down ever since, what Roosevelt accomplished in those first 100 days. And one of the things that he did, and I think all economists agree today, one of the important things he did was to take the country off of the gold standard. And it was because the gold standard wasn't working. And if you think you can read Milton Friedman and understand him, you can get the full story from his works. But he took the country off the gold standard, and he, by executive order, required everyone to turn in their gold at the then existing price of $20.67 an ounce. Other countries were going off the gold standards as well. Most importantly, Great Britain went off before we did. So an international market was developing in gold, and the price, the international price, was over $30 an ounce on the London market. And that executive order cut off the American gold miners from the international price. And what that would have meant is that all the investment money would have gone to gold mining overseas. None of it would have come here. Harry Englebright, as one of his teachers tells us, was never the smartest boy in class, never got the highest marks, but he worked. And what this second congressional district wanted most of all was a congressman who worked. And as soon as the president signed that executive order in April of 1933, Harry Englebright was at the door of the Treasury Department, pointing out to them all the unintended consequences of cutting off gold mining from the international market. And he got the California senators and senators from other mining states involved, and he was able to talk to President Roosevelt man to man about this issue on more than one occasion. And the president was famous for when people would come to talk to him, nodding and saying yes and encouraging them and smiling, and they would leave and they would think the president was on their side. And then the next person would come in with the opposite point of view, and Franklin Roosevelt would say, yes, yes, yes. And he didn't do that with Harry Englebright. He fought back. He didn't want to alter his executive order. He tried to tell Englebright based, I think, upon nothing, just an argument he pulled out of the air. He said, California produces more asparagus than gold. I think that was unfounded because I can't tell you how many days and hours I spent trying to find production figures for asparagus in the 1930s. Well, Congressman Engelbright wouldn't be bluffed, and he kept going back to the Treasury Department. He kept making arguments, and he threatened to, because one of his arguments was the executive order mentioned bullion, which would be gold as we think of it as being refined in bricks, the way it was generally shipped out of this town. And Engelbright said, I am going to go to Grass Valley, I am going to get some unrefined gold that's not bullion yet, and I am going to drive it across the Mexican border and make them arrest me. And then we're going to settle this in court. The executive order was based upon the Trading with the Enemies Act from World War I. It was very dubious legally. That got the Treasury Department's attention. They didn't want to go to court over this. Eventually, Franklin Roosevelt was coerced by Treasury Department people into signing an exemption for newly mined gold. So Grass Valley miners got access to that international market, and mining here just exploded, just took off. Eventually, there were more than 40 mines operating in the vicinity of Grass Valley and Nevada City. Before 1929, there were 4 or 5. And so that was the moment in the fall of 1933 when this really became a boom town. But it was important because people had lived through 1929 not to act like it was a boom. It was important not to show off. Ostentation was socially banned. So people went on living conventional lives. But this town just hummed with activity. And Marion Tremewen, who lives on Union Hill, one of my sources, told me there was as much activity in this town in 1936 as there was in 2006. And any town in America, any place in America, if you wanted a hotel room in a good hotel, you just walk in and you got a room. If you came to Grass Valley and you expected to stay at the Bret Harte or the Travelers Inn, or if you expected to stay at the National in Nevada City, you had better wire ahead because there were no rooms available. Those places were full. They were full with investors and mining engineers and people coming to visit. Just to tell you about one last person who made a big impact, and some of you in the room knew her, and her name was Isabel Heffelfinger. She made an impact in a completely different way. She grew up in Nevada City, was raised in the Methodist Church there where she is still well remembered. Her father was a mining superintendent. She grew up, as she puts it, in a lot of bum places, a lot of raw mining camps in the state of Nevada and the higher slopes of the Sierra. Some of the days she cherished were some childhood days living at North Bloomfield near Malakoff Diggings. After she graduated from high school, she worked at a boarding house in Allegheny, putting out meals and making beds for the miners who worked in 3 shifts, and so they slept in 3 shifts in the same bed. So there were constantly beds to be made up and meals to be served constantly. She became a companion to a family with children in San Francisco, and then a companion to a woman named Bradley. And the Bradley family had a big influence, although they were living in San Francisco, and by then their big investments were in Alaska. But they had a big influence on this town in the 1930s. Their wealth had originally come from the Nevada City mining district. And Mrs. Bradley's doctor saw Isabel Heffelfinger, a very young woman, looking after this elderly woman and said, "You should be a nurse." And arrangements were made. The Bradleys were powerful people. Arrangements were made for her to go to the nursing school at Stanford, where she graduated, specializing in public health. She came back up here, was a public health nurse